Good morning, everyone. My name is Clarence Crawford, and I serve as president of the Maryland State Board of Education. I want to thank you very much for being here today. This is the board's opportunity to officially introduce our new state superintendent of schools, Dr. Carey Wright. We're very excited about having her here. As you know, we have been focused over the past few years on a simple goal: create transformative educational opportunities and outcomes for all of Maryland's children. That would require us to do a whole host of things differently. And we're just excited about having Dr. Wright because we believe that Dr. Wright is the right person at the right time to lead this major transformation. In my judgment, Dr. Wright is the top superintendent in the country. So we're very fortunate to have her here. And I'd like to at this time turn to Dr. Michael to just share a little bit about the process, and then we'll have opening remarks from Dr. Wright, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, President Crawford. We began our search in October of 2023 as we formed our search committee. We sent out an RFP for search firms, and we're pleased to receive a proposal from the HYA team and had the opportunity to work with Drs. Monica Brown and Jack Smith, who really helped us execute a thorough search involving engagement with stakeholders in Maryland and really bringing in talent nationally to build a very strong pool. We began by holding a series of virtual town halls and focus groups consisting of stakeholders, legislators, parents, students, advocates, folks from the governor's office, and from MSDE staff. In total, we were pleased that 211 participants joined for those town halls. We also put out a survey which received 353 respondents that helped us build the profile of the superintendent we were looking for. This feedback told us clearly that Maryland needs and wants an experienced school leader with a clear track record of improving outcomes for children and an understanding of public education here in Maryland. We had significant interest in the position. As of the close of the application on March 1st, 2024, almost 40 individuals had expressed interest in the position, with 26 fully completing applications. As a state board, we reviewed all candidates and identified those with whom wanted to hold interviews, and we conducted a series of interviews throughout March and April. We had very strong candidates, and I'm pleased to share that the board coalesced strongly around one candidate who rose to the top, who met our desired characteristics and leadership profile that the board developed in the initial months of the search. And President Crawford, that resulted in us unanimously selecting last week Dr. Carey Wright to serve as superintendent beginning July 1, 2024.
Dr. Wright.
All right, thank you, and thank you, both President, Vice President, and Board. To say that I'm humbled and honored to be selected is really an understatement. This is a delight to be selected as Maryland's new state superintendent. And most of all, I'm very grateful to the State Board for giving me this amazing opportunity. I consider it a privilege to work not only beside the State Board, but the team at MSDE, educators, students, families, and all of our 24 school systems. You know, growing up in Maryland and spending the majority of my time in Maryland, I have known how good our schools were, and today I know also how much better they can be. I'm energized by this work. I love this work. I want our students and the adults teaching them to be inspired and to aspire to build a foundation of lifelong learning. And since being appointed the interim superintendent, I've been doing a lot of listening and learning. And not only from the team here, but local superintendents, educators, teachers, families, students have even commented. But my goal is to listen to all of these voices and then to make the very best decisions that I can on behalf of all of our children. I believe also that we need to support the adults that work with them each and every day, because it's together that we can improve outcomes for children. You know, I began my career as a teacher, and I believe then and I believe now with all my heart that children can learn and achieve at very high levels. All children can learn and achieve at very high levels. We're going to start at the department by focusing on improving literacy and math in all content areas, also across the board in pre-K through grade 12, because the one thing we want is when our little ones walk the stage at grade 12, we want them prepared for college, career, and life. But I cannot do this work alone. Working together with my state partners, local school systems, parents, and communities, I know we can implement our plan and meet the goals for the blueprint as well as our strategic plan. But above all, we have an opportunity here to elevate Maryland's excellent public school systems and to really make them the envy of the nation. My goal is to work collaboratively to lead the transformational change that this moment calls for. We can, and more importantly, we must deliver on the promise of providing a world-class education for all Maryland students, not only now, but for generations to come. And I am open to your questions.
Dr. Wright, good morning.
Good morning.
And congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
There's so many questions a lot of us have. I won't hold the mic.
Well, you got good questions.
No, people ask. But there's a plethora of things that's going on,
Sure.
obviously. But can you talk a little bit about the ongoing work of the blueprint, where how there's been some school officials, all school officials I talk to are supportive. They feel it's the best thing to go on. But you know, there's some that say, well, how in the world are we gonna take this? How is this gonna work still? Summarize how you can, or what you'll do to continue to talk to some school officials who may be a little worried.
Well, we've already begun that work. So I formed a superintendent's work group about a month ago. We have had 2 meetings, and we've got, I think, 2 or 3 more scheduled, because I wanted to really hear from them directly about what their issues were and what they were struggling with. And and they represent from east to west in the state and north to south. I mean, it's a wide group of superintendents that have come together. And also during that same work group, we've had the AIB leadership there. So you're talking about Ike Leggett, Rick Kerwin, and Rachel Heiss. We've also had the board vice chairman, I don't want to keep calling him chair and vice chair, president and vice president there. And then my entire leadership team has been there as well as the fiscal people. So we've already started these conversations to try to figure out exactly where the pressure points are and then what can we do to resolve them. And I felt it was important that everybody be at the table, because it's not just enough for us to get together with superintendents without having AIB there who oversees all of this. And how are we working together to massage some of these things through? For example, I know we're still working on one of the things that they were expressing a concern about was the unlimited number of dual credit, dual enrollment classes that students can take. So now we are in the process of considering a cap through the graces of AIB. Has said the board can take a look at that and decide what we want to do with that. So that would take off a little bit of pressure. But without really sitting down with people and talking about it and really getting to the nitty gritty, we're not going to be able to solve all these problems. So I think this continued work with this superintendent's group, and we're thinking about forming another superintendent's group to work on some other issues that they're bringing forward. But it's really a time to really be collaborative about this, and so that's part of what we're starting to do as well.
Ma'am, Scott Broom, WSA 9 in Washington. During that interim period, you just said, spent some time testifying, but you also spent a lot of time assessing and learning. Can you characterize anything you found that sort of surprised you at the state of things, and shortcomings or not? Tell us about that.
Well, to be honest with you, I think the biggest thing, well, it wasn't a surprise because I had done a lot of homework prior to being interviewed, but one of the biggest things that really has surprised me is the lack of attention that has been given to the drop in our test scores over the past decade. And they have been a continual drop in both ELA and mathematics. And so when you are facing now an overall proficiency rate of 47% in English language arts and an overall proficiency rate of 23% in mathematics, that's significant. And here we are in the state with these massive riches in terms of resources and people willing to collaborate. You've got an amazing governor and a legislature that's trying to lean in. So That to me is the top priority, is how do we change the trajectory of student achievement so that it's heading in the right direction? Because right now it's not. And that requires us looking, which is another thing we've done, is to really look at how much professional development have teachers been given, how much professional development have our coaches been given. We've got coaches in both literacy and math across the state. And so we, meaning the department, are going to be providing professional development to those coaches in regional groups so they can then go return to their schools and make sure that they're supporting their teachers where the science of reading is concerned or the best practices in mathematics are concerned. So that's a part of what we've done. The board adopted a resolution around the science of reading in January, and so that is going to be how we are moving forward with that. We're in the process of developing a very strong literacy plan and literacy policy. So those are things that to me were the things that I looked at first. And then how are we as a group collaborating? And so that was one thing, that's one of the reasons I reached out to the superintendents, because it's been my understanding that the superintendents and the State Department have not been collaborating as much as they could. And so that was different for me because I'm coming from Mississippi. I met with superintendents on a regular basis to really hear what their concerns were in order to better address what their concerns are. So we're starting a lot of that. I've met with, a lot of people are just excited about the prospect of really doing things in a far more collaborative way and a far more transparent way. And that's one thing that you will learn very quickly about me is I am very transparent. The data are what the data are. We don't point fingers, but we say, this is what's out there, so how are we gonna change that? It's not just, you're not doing well, it's how can we help you to get better at your craft? So those are the things off the top of my head. I am concerned, I will say a step further, about our assessment and accountability system. I've not been shy about talking about that. I don't honestly think our accountability system is holding anybody accountable. And so one of the things that I have done is establish an assessment and accountability task force. And that is comprised of a wide variety of stakeholders, superintendents, principals, local assessment people, higher education, and it is being chaired by the Center for Assessment, which is really the gold standard in dealing with assessment and accountability nationally. And that starts on May 2nd. And so I've asked them to fast track. It's a lot of work that's going to be done between now and December so that they can bring back their recommendations to me because our accountability model is embedded in statute. And so if we have to change anything with our accountability model, that's going to require us being prepared by the time the legislature rolls around in
Yeah, I
January.
was gonna say, accountability only goes down to a certain level inside administrations. I think you wanna go to the superintendent level.
Oh, no. Accountability systems go right to schools and right to districts.
Can you go down all the way down to
Oh, yeah, that's the purpose of an accountability.
principal?
So you
Okay.
kind of
I
proved
didn't
my
know that.
point.
Thank you.
No, but I mean, that's really,
Last time I dealt with this, it was a superintendent change and the state board has signed off on it.
Yeah.
And that was all I understood about
no.
accountability.
So by federal law, every state must have its own accountability system and every state designs its own accountability system to meet its needs. And I'm just a firm believer that accountability drives behavior. So what you're holding people accountable for will result in what you see behaviors in schools and in districts. So if we're saying that improving proficiency and improving growth are an important part of our accountability model, then what are we doing in classrooms to make sure that that's happening? What are we doing in all schools to make sure that that's happening? How are leaders leaning in to make sure that that's happening, both at the school and at the district level? So this task force is going to be looking not only at our assessment system, which I've heard loud and clear from the districts, both at the district level and at the teacher level. This thing has changed 3 times in 3 years, and so that is a concern. It's a concern of mine. It's a legitimate concern of theirs. So that's part of what we're going to be looking at, and then looking at our current components inside our accountability model to make sure that they are as robust as they need to be in order for us to start looking at improving student achievement.
Dr. Wright, you mentioned a decrease in student achievement. 2 weeks ago, we interviewed a teacher from Lock Raven, Stephen Kronberg, 26 years in the classroom. And he told us one of the biggest obstacles is school violence.
Mhm.
And we showed a couple videos that happened that week at Lock Raven High School that were extremely alarming videos involving many students fighting in the school, of which a teacher was involved in the fight and trying to break it up. And he had said that the state isn't dealing with school violence in the proper way. And he had suggested that students that are violent have to be removed from traditional classrooms, put into virtual learning, put into other types of educational environments, so the 95% of the kids who want to be there can focus on their education and the teachers can focus on educating them properly. Again, this is a teacher with 26 years, mostly at Lockeraven High School. How do you see student violence and how do you think that it should be addressed?
So I do believe there has to be accountability, for behavior. I'm not one to say that there's not. But I also think we have to start looking at what are we doing to reward the good behavior that's existing in schools. Having implemented a program that was research-based in developing a focus on positive behavior, I saw a big difference in even the number of children as a principal that were being sent to my office, and a reduction in the number of kids that were getting on fights in the playground. So I think it's both and, it's not either or. I think you need to really focus on the positive behavior that's taking place and rewarding that behavior at the elementary, middle, and high level. But I also believe that there has to be an accountability for children that are not abiding by the rules and or causing disruptive behavior. Now, that may look different in different schools and at different levels. Some people design alternate programs for them. I think some people have policies in place. I think you mentioned to ensure that kids are learning virtually. But I think the key is we've got to make sure that all kids are still learning, but that we are addressing whatever issues that those children may be having. And that could be also the involvement of school counselors, that could be the involvement of social workers, that could be the involvement of any kind of other help that children may need in order to get their behavior under control. So it's a both and. I think you've got to take the positive approach, but you've also got to have the accountability for behaviors that are out of control.
Dr. Wright, I'm Nicole Osborne with the Post. I just wanted to ask, the landscape demographic-wise of Maryland students are changing. We're seeing a more emerging Latino population. And so as you're steering this ship the next couple of years, while our student population is continuing to diversify, what strategies do you see implementing, particularly because many of them are not native English speakers? How do you imagine yourself navigating that landscape a bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that was really, to be honest with you, I think that was the one of the impetus behind Pillar 4, which is putting additional resources in schools to address multilingual learners, to address students with disabilities, to address children that are in extreme poverty. And you're right, that our multilingual population has more than doubled in the past decade. So we have to prepare not only the teachers that teach children that speak another language, but also our general ed teachers, because most of them are the ones that are going to be facing those children in the classroom each and every day. So what kind of professional development are we providing them in order to address the needs that they're facing on an ongoing basis? And that is training. Those are guidance documents. They're lesson plans that we could be providing. But you've got to help the general ed teacher, because we simply don't have enough teachers. They used to be referred to as ESOL teachers, English speakers of other language, that we don't have enough of those teachers. So we've got to prepare our general ed teachers as well. But that also means we have to look at family engagement differently. So how are we helping our schools engage those families in a way that is going to make them more successful in school? And that is going to be a very different strategy, possibly, because they're not speaking English right off the bat. And we don't know culturally how comfortable they are coming into classrooms, and so, or into the building itself. So how are we working with those schools that have a larger population, let's say, of those parents that we want to keep actively engaged? And do we then start looking at even the resources that we are providing, are we also providing them in another language? And I think we've just got to do things differently, because you've got a totally different population than you may have had a decade ago.
Dr. Wright, you mentioned that assessment systems have changed 3 times in the past 3 years. Can you explain what that means or what the change was? And then you also mentioned that when you looked into it, you saw that people weren't being held accountable. Can you elaborate on what that looked like or what it should look like?
Well, I guess to me, accountability needs to be very transparent. So the components inside the accountability model that were designed under ESSA and approved by the feds, that every state had to go through the same thing. So the components were there, but anytime you don't have anybody really talking about it, it makes it, all those things that are happening below the surface that aren't happening well for children just don't get discussed. And so I think it really kind of hit me, I think it was in December when our statewide assessment results were put out. And the comment that was made was, We have 76, by MSDE at the table, we have 76% of our schools receiving a 3, 4, or 5-star rating. And almost in the next breath, and we have a 47% proficiency rate. So that just doesn't ring true. You can't have 3/4 of your schools being rated as excellent, if you will, and then not seeing student achievement almost commensurate with that. So it's my understanding that they were, COVID hit everybody. Even when I was in Mississippi, we did not test in 20, just like Maryland didn't test in 20. And then, if memory serves, and you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but when we came out of COVID here in Maryland in 21 and 22, we did not test in spring of 22. We tested in fall of 22. So that was a little bit of a different change. And then instead of using a 4-level system, which had been the prior model, advanced, proficient, et cetera, it was moved into a 3-level system that year as well, and those results were released. So it causes me to ask a lot of questions, and so that's really why, and I'm not the psychometrician, and I will be the first person to tell you that I'm not a psychometrician, but assessment and accountability is something I kind of lived in that world for the past 9 years where states are concerned. So I thought this would be a good idea to get a lot of different eyes looking at this, a lot of professionals looking at this, and there are psychometricians on this as well as the practitioners to say, is there something we need to do and need to do differently? And do we need to design a different model that's far more transparent than the one that we have? Because I think families deserve to know, what their school, how their schools are really doing, and children deserve to know, and communities deserve to know. And I think the whole world really deserves, in Maryland, deserves to know how children are doing. Because the only way we're gonna get better is if we're honest about where we are, and then we're honest about the strategies that we need to put in place in order to get better. And to me, that's where I come from. This is not a finger pointing exercise for me. This is we gotta get better. And so we need to have different eyes looking at different aspects of our work in order to get better and be transparent about what we're doing.
I'll just add, one of the board, has heard, we've heard a lot from stakeholders, and we've gotten some very strong, simple commitments from the superintendent moving forward. The first is, when we get data at the board, when it's released, it has been practice in recent years to actually lag the release of school data. And we have a commitment from Dr. Wright that they will now be released on the day that they're released at the board. And that's just pragmatically for the public, a really important element of transparency and accountability. The second is, and we've talked at length on this, is the report card website needs to be a lot more accessible for folks to understand and be able to access data for their schools and their districts. And so delighted that Dr. Wright will be leading that portion of the accountability. And the third is that space between how is it we have 75% of our schools having such high star ratings, and we've seen essentially in math and reading prior to the pandemic, and now we saw essentially no change in math and reading scores on our state assessment, while we've seen a decline on our performance on national assessments. But we have, this concentration. So, there is some nuance, and there is, some psychometrician level elements of why that is the case, but that's what the public is saying. How is it that we have all of these highly rated schools and our data is not moving? And so we have a leader in Dr. Wright who is willing to make transparent these simple fixes and get under the hood and convene people to really get at that piece of how do we get the core work of schools moving again in our public schools in Maryland.
Also, on the report card, this past year, a lot of schools saw a drop in a star, and that was discussed at the time that maybe that was related to absenteeism being factored back in. For schools that don't have a lot of personnel to do reentry work or home visits or calling parents all the time, what are some solutions to addressing absenteeism?
Well, we have reached out to Attendance Works, which is the national organization that addresses chronic absenteeism, and we're blessed to have one of their key members lives right here in Baltimore. So I've already reached out to her, and what we're going to be doing is putting together a guidance document for schools to let them know what are some of the key strategies, what are some of the best practices at the elementary, middle, and high level for addressing chronic absenteeism And so that will be forthcoming as well. I testified to this at the legislature this past year, and I also promised them that I would deliver on that. So I think schools, we need to give to schools what are the best strategies rather than just expecting every single school, all 1,400 of them, to think of this on their own. That's really our job. Our job is really to say, here's what we think are your best practices that you could put in play.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
You
Just a
mentioned
quick
school accountability, and a lot of MCAP data is something that has been discussed.
Yes.
The previous superintendent changed the way that MCAP data is released to the public. And there's certain schools in Maryland that you cannot see any data anymore for any of the MCAP scores. Is that part of the assessment and accountability task force? And can you give us an update on where you stand on the change in certain end sizes that the previous superintendent did? And is there a chance to go back to the way that it had been done previously?
Well, so your first question is yes, the Assessment and Accountability Task Force are definitely going to be looking at that aspect. And it's been my experience as a state chief to use 10 as an end count, 10 and lower. So that would be a hope that I would have, that we could return to 10 and lower, because I think it's more transparent. But the other thing we have to be cautious of is we have to protect, the identification of individual children. So we know that, but I think there's ways that we can do that and still be transparent in our data across the entire state.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.